name is Renee Richard. I'm the founder and executive director of Cinnamongirl Incorporated. I'm excited to introduce my organization to you as we begin this amazing book talk. Cinnamongirl is an organization of leaders providing girls of color with experiences and a network of influential people that help build confidence, develop her talents, and reveal her true potential to radically change the world. We are in our 17th year of teaching girls leadership development. We inspire girls to set and achieve rigorous goals, provide guidance and support as to what's needed to prepare her for college and graduate school, and expose girls to a global mindset through international travel. And finally, we have a phenomenal writing program that introduces girls to the world of literature. Our Cinnamon Girls are surrounded with other ambitious youth, hands-on mentors, high-performing female leaders that encourage her to step out of her comfort zone, knowing she has the tools to take charge of her life and become a successful leader. We are together inspiring girls destined for greatness. So for more information, visit cinnamongirl.org. And with that, I introduce to you one of our fierce leaders.
Hi, my name's Jenny. I'm in 11th grade. I attend Berkeley High School. I'm 16 years old, and I'm part of the organization Cinnamon Girls. I've been in Cinnamon Girls since last year, and my favorite hobbies to do are reading, gardening, playing sports, and I do a lot of other things as well. My favorite books to read are fantasy, and it's just mostly fantasy. And I'm going to hand it off to the authors to introduce themselves and their amazing books.
I can go. I'm Maggie Tokuda-Hall. I'm the author of The Mermaid, The Witch, and the Sea, which went on sale on May 5th from Candlewick Press.
And I'm Rebecca Hanover, the author of The Similars and the sequel, The Pretenders, both which came out in 2019.
Nice. Okay, for my first question to ask is, when did you start writing in your life, or when did you know you wanted to be a writer? What gave you your spark, your inspiration, or something that clicked with you and you know you wanted to do it?
I'll jump in. For me, it was actually in college. I had always been really involved in theater, and I was a drama and an English major. And I enjoyed writing, but I was much more focused on sort of the performing aspect. And then I actually ended up taking a lot of playwriting classes in college, and then eventually writing my own one-woman show that I performed as like a senior thesis.
Cool.
And it was called Suburban Revenge. It was a very senior thesis kind of title. But after that, it really was a moment where something clicked, and people in the audience were laughing. I mean, in a good way, and afterwards they said, oh, your acting was fine, but wow, that was so funny, or that was so interesting. And so it was kind of the first time something I'd written really resonated with anyone. And that's kind of where the spark started for me to seriously pursue writing after college.
I started in high school, sort of. I thought I wanted to be like a visual artist, but I applied on a whim to the California State Summer School for the Arts under the creative writing thing. I don't even remember why, because it wasn't really like my primary interest, but I got in and I loved doing critique and everything like that. And I was like, oh, that's neat. I'll file that away and never remember it again. And then when I was in college, I took a creative writing class because I always liked it, but I didn't really think of it as being like my thing. And I had a professor who was just like incredibly encouraging. And then one day after class, she handed me an application to this Skidmore Writers Institute thing. And she had written my name on the top, like just filled in my name on the application. And she was like, you should just apply to this. And I don't know, just that little bit of faith that she had that I could do it was like all I needed. And then I applied and I got in. And when I was there, it was 2 weeks of intensive crit groups all day long, every day. And then you would go back to your little dorm room and do homework to bring back the next day. And I loved it. Like, I was just not ever tired. Like, it was the most fun I'd ever had. And I think that was when I really started thinking, like, maybe writing's actually what I want to do, not visual art, because when I would paint, I didn't have that same sense of it being effortless and fun. It was always like really arduous. So that was really what got me going.
Awesome. I love that you just like find that spark and then you just went for it.
Yeah.
For my second question is, what inspired you to write your books? Like, how did you know you wanted to like write more about this topic, more about this scene? Like, what inspired you to keep writing about your books?
I can kick us off. I was an independent bookseller for almost a decade, in which time I met a kid named Claire, and she was and is an amazing reader and super talented and interesting. And her parents hired me to be her creative writing tutor. And while I was tutoring her, we would talk about books all the time for obvious reasons. And it became clear that she loved fantasy. Like, that was her favorite. She's like you, big fantasy reader. That was her favorite genre. But she was also queer and is also still queer, and never saw those queer romances at the center of it in the kind of epic way that romance is often at the center of fantasy stories. And so I started writing The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea when she was about 12 years old. She is 21 now. But this book was written exactly for her and the things that she wanted.
Oh, how sweet.
That's amazing. I'm super excited to read it, by the way.
Thank you. Likewise.
It just came out?
Yes. Yeah, it came out last week.
Awesome. Congrats.
Thank you.
So for me, I had a theater background, which I know I mentioned, and then I was a soap opera writer for quite a while in my 20s, and I was quite trained in like screenwriting, and it was all self-taught, but I had really studied those screenwriting and like TV writing craft. And then I learned so much on the job, of course. So but throughout all of that, I was a huge young adult fan. Like, I will unabashedly say that I'm super excited about this new Twilight book coming out because, and the Hunger Games prequel is like next week. So for me, those were like what I read and devoured during that kind of era. I mean, now young adult is like has gone so many incredible places since then. But I was a huge fan, and I'd always wanted to write a young adult novel, but I never really had that exact spark of an idea that I felt like I could really run with for the long haul, which is often how long you have to work on, especially a debut novel. I'd sort of always been searching for that idea. And then one day this spark of an idea came, and it was, what if clones came to a high school, clones of kids who were already attending that high school, and like, what would that social experiment be like, and what would happen? And it was literally just like, it really was like a flash of an idea. And then I thought about it for a year. I just marinated it and considered all the elements of, asked all these questions about what would that be like, and what kind of identity crises would these kids go through? And then more and more questions kept coming, which made me realize that the idea did have, like, it had teeth, it had legs, and would be something that I could really dig into. And gosh, now like 7 years later, maybe, here we are. It was quite a while ago when I first had the idea for the series.
I love that you kept going on and building forward on that. That's really amazing. And now you have like a brand new book about it. It's like, boom. That's great. For my third question is similar to your books. When you are developing your characters, your main characters, do you have something similar, like something that you have in common with them? Like, is there a certain connection you feel with them?
I can go ahead. Yeah, I mean, my main character in the similars is like way more badass than me. I mean, like, just she's so much cooler than I'll ever be. So I can't say that like, oh, she's me at all. But she's a nerd, and she's sort of a low maintenance, low key kind of person. And she has this sarcastic sense of humor, which again is sort of more who I want to be than who I actually am. But yeah, I think she's certainly comes from a part of me. Although I do think it would be really fun to write a book where the main character is like my polar opposite, but maybe the next one.
I've heard the quote that all art is in some way a self-portrait, and I tend to agree with that. And so I would say like there's like a lot of aspects from my own experience that I pulled and kind of interjected into characters. One of the main point of view characters is named Evelyn, and she comes from a well-to-do family and has had financial privilege for her entire life. And that was definitely the way that I was raised, with a lot of comfort. And the imperial society that she's a part of is meant to be sort of a hybrid between feudal Japanese culture and British and American imperialism. And in that way, I felt like she serves as a function for me to interrogate my own heritage. She's sort of the lens that I look at the way my own sort of inheritance through. But, there's other characters in the story as well who seem really different than me on face. There's Flora/Florian, who's a bigender pirate. And while I don't identify as bigender, I've definitely had times in my life where the way that I think about my own gender is deeply dependent on context. And that character was a way for me to sort of explore that. And also one of the characters in the story is the sea, like the literal ocean, as a point of view character. And that character had nothing to do with me. I just thought that was rad, and I wanted to do it. And the fun thing about writing books is you get to do whatever you want.
That's great. For my next question is a little bit more on that. So when I was reading both your books, when the beginning, I both saw that there was romance. And so one was with one was in a part with your book, where Evelyn was falling in love with her maid. Mm-hmm. And in the Pretenders book, her main character is looking for her actual true love, which is actually a clone. So on topic on that, would you consider yourselves romantics? Because there's a lot of love in that beginning of the chapters.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that writing romance is deeply underrated and really hard. And I also know that when I was a teenager, you were probably more sophisticated than this, but when I was a teenager, I wasn't actually a huge reader. And the only way that I would read was if there was murder or kissing, and ideally both. So every time I sit down to write YA, I keep that in mind because I knew what I liked. I knew what I was about. So I try not to forget that.
Same. I mean, I'm still that way. So yes, I'm definitely... I don't know that I'm such a romantic in real life, but in that sort of escapism kind of way, I definitely am. Like I will go in for any, love triangle. Like I'm there for that in what I like to read and watch, for sure.
I think what romance provides us that is so addictive is the sense of tension and propulsion. So it's like inherently there's some conflict at the center of it, which is just like, how is this going to work? Because all of relationship building has tension and conflict in it. And I think that's what makes it so satisfying to read and to kind of watch unfold between real people, between fictional characters. I mean, I think there's a reason that when we gossip, we tend to gossip about other people's romantic entanglements because it's interesting.
Yeah. I do the same. Now, back to your stories. I wanted to know, like, personally, on your guys' opinion, what was your favorite part of writing your story? Was there a favorite moment that you wanted to capture in? Or was there a favorite moment that you just like writing because it gave you joy? Or was it like, what was your favorite moment to write of both your stories?
Gosh, I mean, there were so many highs and lows. I like, as you were talking, I was thinking like little like roller coaster, like, you know, getting that first draft written. For me, there's something about like finally, even if it's messy, even if it's, you know, you're going to revise it 1,000 times, like getting the story down on paper in even the roughest form is such a thrill, because it's when I feel like, oh God, I got that out of my head and onto the page. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly moments in each book that were like a blast to write. Honestly, a lot of those romantic moments, the moments that I'd always sort of envisioned in both books, like those really climactic, cliffhangery type of moments, those are always like so much fun. And then you have to get to the meaty, like transitional parts, and then you go from a high to a low in terms of like struggling sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I love all of the process, even the parts where I struggle. It's still, I love to write so much that it's extremely satisfying, even when it's super hard.
I wish I were as positive as you. I do not love every aspect of writing. But the parts that I probably had the most fun with, because it's fantasy, I allowed myself to steal from history like all the time, or from things around me. So when I was writing the book, my husband and I had quit our jobs and were driving in like a 4Runner through South America. And so we were in all these different locations all the time. So I was stealing glimpses, physicalities and things like that for all the different settings. There's a setting that's like pretty closely based on the Galapagos later on in the book. There's a setting that's based on like northernmost Colombia. And there's the detail when Evelyn ships off to go meet her husband that she's basically being sold to by her parents. She packs all of her things into a casket and goes off with it. And a lot of people have been like, wow, that's a nutty detail. How did you come up with that? And the truth is, I didn't at all. I absolutely stole it from reality. I took a ghost tour in New Orleans on our way, actually driving through the United States to drive to where we were going to ship our car from to go to South America. And they were saying that girls from France were shipped over to New Orleans with their caskets as like an indication to their would-be husbands that they were taking this seriously and that they weren't planning on going home. And I thought that was amazing, and I never substantiated it. And I don't care if it's true or not. It's just such an amazing story detail that I like heard it and I was like, well, that's mine now. I take it. It takes it. So yeah, I like the way that writing makes you like a collector of information in regular life, where you get to go around the world, and stealing is maybe not the right word for it, but to borrow from reality all the time and to figure out new ways to situate those little truths into the lies that you're telling is a really fun exercise.
Yeah, that's like, wow. I couldn't even believe like that actually happened in real life, and you just like, you made it like so lifelike. That's awesome. Now, for the next part of that question is, what was the most part in your story that you struggled with? Like, say if you had like a point where you had writer's block where you didn't know what's going to happen, or you didn't know what to write next. What was like, was that like hard for anyone, or was like, well, of course it's going to be hard, but like, how did you get through it?
I can kick that off. I mentioned I started this book 8 years ago. I didn't write on it consistently that entire time. I would like put it away for months and even a year at a time. And my first book is a picture book called Also an Octopus that came out in 2016. And after it came out, I was like super depressed because I was like, I don't have any more books coming out. That was it. That's my book. And it's over already. Like, did my little events. And my husband was very sweet about it. And he was like, the only reason that's your only book is because you haven't written anymore. Why don't you just finish that book that you started? And then this was during while we were traveling. He's like, let's both make it a thing, because he programs. And he's like, we'll each work for exactly an hour a day. It doesn't matter how much or how little you get done in that time. You just have to work. And even if that means staring at your computer screen and getting nothing done, you're working. And that was how I eventually got a draft done. And I think the biggest lesson that I took away from it was that I just kept rewriting the beginning over and over and over again. Have you seen that meme where it's a horse that somebody's drawn, and the back of the horse is like hyper realistic and like beautifully rendered, but then as they move up the body, they lose energy, and by the time they get to the top, it's like a stick figure? That is very much what my first draft looked like. And I learned very much the hard way that like you can't have a perfect beginning. There's no such thing as a perfect beginning if it doesn't have an answer or an ending to answer to it. And so that was the hardest part, was just like moving past being like, well, if I just get every sentence perfect, then the next one will write itself. And it turns out that that's not the way that it works. You just have to write all the way through, and then you can go back and fix and make it beautiful and change it. But so that took a long time to learn.
I could not agree more. Everything you said. I mean, however, imagine all that, but no picture book first. So then you're just like, am I ever going to publish a book? But I'm teasing, but I completely get you, because I mean, I know I said 7 years. I don't know. I've lost track of time, but it basically took me about 5 years to write the similars. And exact same thing. I wasn't traveling or doing anything exotic. I just had first one kid and then another kid. And so I took a lot of time off for that, which, I'm super kind to myself now about it, and realize that like the journey I was on was always the way it was supposed to be. And maybe the book wouldn't even exist if I hadn't written it the way I had. It's so easy now to say, you should have just written every single day. Who cares if you had a baby or whatever, you would have finished it. But I don't do that, because again, like the journey, it all worked out, I think, as it was meant to be. But yeah, I had a really similar experience with writing, the first 25% of it, like over and over. And then I actually had to ask a friend. I had a critique group, two of my best friends who also write, and they're still my critique group. They're amazing. But I felt like I needed some outside person who didn't know anything about the book, didn't even know what it was about, to kind of read it in a serialized fashion. So I found this friend who loves YA, and I would send her like a chapter each day. And then I told her, when I get to the point where I don't have any more chapters, then I need you to be like, where's the next chapter? Where's the next chapter? And that actually worked. And it really motivated me to get her the next chapter. And so that messy middle part, I know people call it that, that's like super cheesy, but the messy middle can be really tricky, because you usually know where your story starts. You usually know where it sort of ends, but the middle can be this connecting tissue kind of part that is really hard to get down on paper. So for me, that was a huge struggle. But once I got past it, in writing book 2, it wasn't an issue. And I think I now have just learned so much from the process that I kind of know how to trick myself into keeping going now, I hope.
It is so nice when you can make it social, because writing is inherently lonely. I have a friend, and we call each other accountability buddies for when we're trying to push through a part in a draft. And we'll do things like call each other and read all the new material that we wrote that day. That can be helpful, so that you feel more like you got work done and they can compliment you.
Absolutely. Though someone who will just give that unconditional love is also can be super helpful at that early stage where your draft, I mean, I'm stealing this from like a million other authors who call it their 0 draft, but I've definitely started thinking of my first draft as my 0 draft too. Because it helps you if you know, it's all about the psychology of your expectations. If you expect every sentence to be perfect, you'll fail, and then you won't ever get it done. But if you're like, this is my 0 draft, it's not going to be that good, but that's fine. That's exactly right. Then you'll have, I mean, for me anyway, I just have an easier time facing how bad some of it is if that's what my expectation is set that way.
And to relating that question, as I know both of you took some time with your books because it went through so much paperwork or drafting or coming up with a storyline. And I wanted to know from just for me, is when you were writing your books, through all the process, and when you finally thought you were finished, how did it feel like? Well, how did you feel in the moment knowing that this would be the ending, this would be the final sentence, this would be the final word? How did you feel when you knew that was going to be the ending?
I don't think I got that feeling until the book came out, where you realize you really can't tinker with it anymore. Because even when you finish a draft, you're like, all right, now's the time to roll up my sleeves and fix it, because you left some nonsense behind. And going back in, I don't know, every time you revise, I find that really invigorating, because you're always like, I'm just making it better. This is great. I'm such a professional. I'm doing such a good job. And then later, now it's been years, it feels since I even looked at it, but it only now feels like it's done last week, because there are people reading it, so I can't go back and be like, actually, I had another cool idea, and I just wanted to put it in. It's over. My relationship with this book is basically done. It's everyone else's now.
Yeah, I agree. I think I would rewind and say that feeling happens a little sooner for me, maybe at the arc stage, when the book, you get your arc of the book and it feels real-ish. And then that it's just small changes that are more copy editing kind of things. I think that's when I kind of get that relieved feeling. Okay, I did it, and at this point it's pretty much is what it's going to be. So, especially for book 2, because I was on such a tight deadline for that. It was basically, it actually came out 11 months after the first one, not even a full year. But if you think about it, I started it way before. I actually turned in the draft of The Pretenders literally the day The Similars came out, which is such a strange turn of events. It was January 1st too. So it was very, I know, kind of crazy. My back, and then also my back, this has never happened to me before. My back gave out. I feel like that was one of those brain body kind of weird things where my body was like, you're done. Just relax for a little while. Anyway, that was a tangent. But yeah, I think seeing the book in some kind of printed form, even if it's the ARC, the advanced reader copy, is when I feel that oh, thank goodness kind of feeling.
Yes.
You feel, oh, thank goodness, not oh no, now people are going to see my underpants. That was, you're on that side of the fence.
Yeah.
Okay, I think with the first book, I felt that way, the underpants feeling for sure. And then I think the second book, something had changed for me where I was just over worrying about what people were going to think about it. And because I just knew I had written the best sequel that I possibly could, given the time constraints and given, just all the practicalities of it and the expectations from my publisher. So I think I grew, learned and grew a lot mentally in the debut year. So such that I just didn't care as much about worrying about that. It was more oh, thank goodness I had this commitment to my publisher and I fulfilled it. That was sort of where I was with it. And I felt like I had done my characters justice and everything like that too. But.
Yeah. I love that you guys are getting on such a better connection. And for my next question is, for your books, what was the main thing you wanted your readers, now that your books are out there, what was one thing you want your readers to capture from your book? Was there something that you wanted them to not say interpret, but take away from it? Is there something important that you wanted them to see or wanted them to feel, wanted them to learn? What was one important part you wanted your audience to take away from your book?
Mostly I want them to have fun while they're reading it, because I feel like if they're not enjoying it, then I really failed them in some kind of fundamental way. But But I do hope every character in my story has the identity that they show the world and the identity that they feel like they are inside. And somebody explicitly says it in the book that power comes from knowing your truth and not your story. So the idea of your self-mythology actually matching up with who you feel like you are. Your self-mythology being kind of like what you tell other people about yourself, being a source of power. And I do hope that maybe someone who feels like there's a really big divide between who they present outwardly versus who they are inside would feel maybe slightly more emboldened to tell more of the truth about what they feel inside, about themselves and who they are.
Well, I was going to answer fun, but you took the words out of my mouth. No, I don't have an answer. No, I'm just kidding. I would say on the most superficial level, but also sort of on the most fundamental level in a way, I would hope that my book series would be like the perfect read right now during this, crazy, unprecedented time that we're having right now, in the sense that it's meant to be fun. It's meant to be a distraction from real life. It's meant to be, have cliffhangers that keep you on the edge of your seat and maybe keep you up reading late into the night. Like that would be, if anyone feels that way, it's like amazing to me. With that said, there's so many, the reason that I was able to work on this story for so long is that there's so many places it goes in terms of questions of identity, questions of like acceptance and tolerance, and our place in the world, and even questions about science and genetics and nature versus nurture. And so to me, the books that I enjoy the most are fun, but they also ask kind of big questions about the world. So that's sort of what I hope that people are taking away from it.
I love that. I love like every sentence of both your answers. Honestly, that touched me right then and there. And relating to one of my earlier questions that I said before, I wanted to know, before you got into writing, or if writing has been what all you wanted to do in all your life, what was something you wanted to do before writing? Like, did you have something you wanted to pursue, something that you wanted actually to become before writing kind of like took over and became who you are now? Was there something before that you wanted to pursue in life?
So for me, I'll jump in. It was theater and performing, which now seems like so funny because even just doing this made me nervous. So I don't know like where that person went, but I love, I love theater and musicals, especially. Like I'm a huge Hamilton nerd, and singing and dancing and all that. So that was something I pursued through college. I think I pretty much, once I got to New York City, which is where I moved after college, kind of realized like, oh, this is like the big time. There's probably no way I'm going to end up doing that as a career. But it did, segue really nicely into a writing career, because so much about the theater is storytelling, right? It's all just storytelling in different ways. So I've never looked back or missed it, because I feel like writing is what I was always meant to do. I just didn't quite realize it when I was younger.
Yeah, same. I feel like there were so many clues along the way that my aptitude was really for storytelling. And I was like, but maybe I'll be a painter. And the world was like, maybe not. Like, maybe you're pretty bad at that. And then I was like, maybe I'll run gallery spaces. And then I realized I found that like blazingly boring. No offense to anyone who does run galleries. It's just, that's not my actual aptitude or passion. And so there was like a lot of jobs around the art world that I thought, I could be well suited for, and sort of systematically realized like each one of them was not actually what I wanted to do. And that my favorite part about interning in a gallery was writing the text panels to go next to the paintings. It had nothing to do with anything else. So I wanted to do that. And then even once I was getting my MFA in writing, I thought I wasn't good enough to be a professional writer, but that I could be good enough
to be a professional editor. And so for a really long time, that was actually what I wanted to do. And I just couldn't break in. And in that time, I started writing again. And it turns out, like, once again, writing was actually where it was the whole time. I just kept kind of feeling like that was too big and too scary and too, like, smarter people were doing it than me, so I shouldn't even try. And it, you know, there are still smarter people than me doing it, most other people. But, you know, I got this book published and they can't take that away from me now.
I feel the exact same way. way more literary people, more talented people. But I mean, I think it's taken me, you know, as old as I am, to realize, like, how much that just doesn't matter, because we're all writing the books or working on the projects that we should be doing, you know, and no one else could have written the book that you wrote. So that's all that matters.
So I would like you to just follow me around for, like, the next month and, like, whisper that in my ear on a daily basis. If you could, I would really appreciate that.
Fun. I have tons of time right now. So.
So it was kind of like a leap of faith when you started pursuing what you liked, what you found passion for, what you found love in doing. So it was kind of like a leap of faith.
In a lot of ways, yeah. I feel like one of the things I try to remind aspiring writers of is that it's a really hard job because everyone wants to do it because it's fun and everyone has an idea. And so giving yourself the space and the time to tell your story and to really work on your craft and to get better at it and to take it seriously, because it's still hard work to write silly, fun stories. Like, arguably, I think sometimes more difficult because you know, to keep it fun is a difficult task. And so there is, like, a faith element to it, that, like, that time that you are spending is worth it. And I think part of that is too many people make getting something published sort of like the end all be all of their happiness. And it's not, like, that's not really what's most important. What's most important, I don't mean to be one of those people like, what's most important is the friends you make along the way. But it is kind of like the fun you have along the way, because if it's torture for you the entire time, probably not the right career path for you, man. Like, and that's okay. Not everyone has to be a professional writer. It's just as valid to write for fun and to read things to your friends and to, you know, write fanfic and have that be your whole thing. That's completely legit and super fun. And I hope that more people do that instead of paying huge amounts of money to go to conferences to try to be a professional at something that ultimately isn't really the right fit for them.
I agree, though, I agree with all of that, but I think we're soulmates. Because everything you're saying is resonating with me. But yeah, I think it's such a leap of faith. I mean, any book you write, I think, whether it's your debut or not, and probably any artistic endeavor, really is a totally a leap of faith, because you have no idea how it's going to pan out. And you certainly have no idea if other people will get the chance to read it or listen to it, whatever it is. And you certainly don't know what they're going to think of it. So, I mean, it's such a leap of faith. For me, I had to complete that first book. I just had to do it. I think my husband, this is going to maybe sound funny, but because it's going to make him seem like weird or something, but he basically was like, finish it. Like, for God's sake, just finish it. And then, like, this is going to sound weird. Like, then I'll be proud of you. Like, just finish it. That's what matters. Like, it doesn't matter. You know, I had conversations with him like, well, what if I query every agent on the planet and nobody, like, literally no one wants to, you know, represent it or whatever. He just kept, you know, hammering home to me, like, how much that was not what mattered. It was finishing the book, because that ultimately would make me happy. in having, gotten the words on the page, the story that I was trying to tell. So I try to have that. I try to remember that and kind of have that attitude with every project.
The one piece of advice I do feel like super qualified to give is that the only difference between professional writers and amateur writers is that professional writers finish. Like that's like the brutal truth, because it doesn't matter if you're like super talented if you're just writing beginnings over and over and over again. You're going to be doing this as an amateur for the rest of your life then, which is fine. Again, like being an amateur writer is dope, and you don't have to worry about what other people think about your writing. You can really just write for yourself. But if you are interested in making it into your career, you have to finish.
Absolutely. Maybe that's what he was getting at, but I mean, he was totally right, Yeah, I mean, because writing, it's such a slog. I mean, I know I'm sitting here saying, I love it so much. It can be such a slog, just like any job. I mean, anything that you put thousands and thousands of hours into, it's really, really, really hard on so many levels. So much of it is about getting in the chair, getting in front of your laptop, writing words. It doesn't have to be every day. Whatever your cadence is, whatever, gives you continuity, and you have to learn to push through and get to the end, and then how to rewrite and rewrite again,
And then a couple more times.
Somebody recently said, I'm stealing this from someone else's Instagram or something, but they said, I'm not a good writer, I'm a good rewriter. And that's really stuck with me also, because I absolutely relate to that. And that's like, again, that's a good sort of psychological trick you can play on yourself. Like, write that crappy first draft. You're going to rewrite it a million times. So that's fine. That's your chance to fix all of it, but get that draft written, and you'll be miles ahead of, obviously where you would be if you just, stay in the middle and never let yourself feel the pain of having to finish it. Go ahead.
Right. You can't improve on nothing.
Right.
Like, there's nothing there. There's nothing to make better.
Wow. Your answers were inspiring. I love that saying where I'm not a writer, I'm a rewriter. I like that. That actually is like a nice phrase. And I love how you say like you push forward even though it's hard and sweat and tears, and it brings you joy after all in the end. And I find that truly inspiring. And for my last question is, when you were, let's say when your book finally was out there, it was in stores or marketplaces or however your book was out in the world, how was the feeling? Was it like tears of joy, excited, happiness, or something completed within yourself? Like, how were you feeling when your book was out in the world?
I was a bookseller for a really long time. So the first time I saw my name like on a book in a bookstore in alphabetical order with all of its peers, it felt really great. But I wouldn't say that it felt like, oh, now I'm a complete person, or like now I don't have depression anymore, or like, or any of it doesn't fix you. And I do think that that's why a lot of the times authors after their first books get really depressed, is because we thought it would fix some of the tougher feelings in our lives about feeling like imposters or feeling not good enough. And those things will dog you kind of, who are like, you still have to work on yourself. That doesn't go away when you publish. The first time I felt like, oh, I'm doing it was, this is sort of a crass answer, but I quit other jobs a couple of years ago. And the first time I started making the same amount of money as a writer as I did when I was working in publishing, felt like, okay, you're not a crazy person anymore. You did it. This is a job and you can take it seriously, and you don't have to keep apologizing every time someone asks you what you do for a living and be like, nothing. I mean, sort of, I don't know. I kind of write. And so having something tangible like that, more so than seeing my book in person for the first time, was heartening, just so that I knew I was like actually making my way with it.
Yeah, I think seeing your book, it's a little bit on the shelf. It's a little bit surreal in a way that it was hard to kind of even process what it really meant. Because there's so much in your debut, in the, debut era timing, that it's like you have these arcs come out, you might have people seeing those, you might see reviews on Goodreads, like before your book's even out. There's kind of all these events that happen. It's all this whirlwind and it's sort of overwhelming. And so, I mean, it was certainly like incredibly exciting. And the biggest thing I felt around the time of my debut was just total relief, honestly. Relief that it was happening. And like you said, Maggie, like no one could take that away. Like no matter what happened, I was a published author and I could check that off. Like, as simple as that. And that's a feeling I still take with me. Like, I know that I've written a series now. I mean, that was a lifelong, maybe not lifelong, but since like I was 20, a dream, to write a young adult series. And so I have such a feeling of relief and pride that I saw it through, in spite of everything in life and all the reasons to quit and all the, reasons to doubt yourself. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I have 3 little kids and I never have that much time to really go too deep on any of this stuff. Like, it's, they keep me incredibly busy. And I mean, honestly, the best thing for me in my debut year was that like, I still had little kids at home who needed things from me all the time. 'Cause they just keep you grounded and they just remind you that like, just have perspective. And so I agree. Becoming a published author doesn't solve your problems or really change anything about you, because by that point you've already done all the work. But it's definitely something to feel proud of. And again, overwhelming relief was the main feeling.
Wow. Thank you for your answers. They were truly lovely. Thank you for giving me your time to interview and ask these awesome questions. Thank you for everything. It was a pleasure meeting both of you, and reading both your stories were truly incredible.
Thank you, Jenny. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you.
Yes, thank you so much, Jenny. You're so wonderful, and this just fills me with so much joy today, especially given everything going on. So really appreciate it.
I hope everyone gets a chance to read, and buy their books wherever you can, online, in stores, preferably online. And I hope everyone gets a chance to truly see what lies in their books.